Hello and welcome back to the Championship Lowdown podcast. I am joined by Chris after some time away. Welcome back to the podcast, Chris.
Yeah, good to be back after a hiatus and a really exciting week of championship action to come back to as well.
Yeah, I mean, we said before recording, but it's sort of the first time we've actually struggled to decide on which games to use because normally it's quite clear cut, but there was a lot of good games this week. And we'll start with one of the better ones of the lot, Wrexham versus Coventry. Coventry finally dealt their first loss of the season as the last unbeaten team in the Championship full, thanks to a perfect hat-trick from Kiefer Moore in the second half to bring them back from what was a 1-0 deficit early in the first half, thanks to a Mason Clark goal and Sakamoto's goal in the 80th minute being just a consolation. But Coventry finally fall, and Kiefer Moore, Chris, with an absolute clinic at home to give Wrexham a massive and very unexpected 3 points.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest result we've seen of Wrexham since this whole journey started. I'd argue it's their biggest result, especially with the way Coventry have been playing. Don't forget Windass going down in the records as well, with providing 3 assists for Kiefer Moore as well. We know the loss was going to come eventually for Coventry. We've seen it at the start of the season with all the teams who'd started to run away. It's now about how they respond, and I think they've got a perfect chance to respond with a really deflated Sheffield United team up next as well. So, in terms of title challenges and promotion charges, it's all about how you respond to the losses, more about how you keep picking up wins on the pitch. So, if the losses are going to come, and you've just got to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I said on the preview episode for this week with Ollie on Thursday, it was sort of, I said, it will happen. No team will ever go unbeaten in this division. It's not possible. It's too difficult. There's always upsets. I didn't think it would come as soon as this week, but I did say, under the light at the racecourse intense sellout atmosphere, it would be a difficult task. And, it's proven true. As you said, Josh Windass with 3 assists, Keith Moore with the perfect hat-trick, right foot, left foot, and a header. I think Lewis O'Brien deserves a lot of praise as well. I thought he was excellent. He could have probably had a goal of his own as well. But Coventry just not quite up to it, especially in the second half. Sort of just fell away from what we're normally used to seeing from a Coventry side. Still unbelievably get 2 goals even in the games they lose. So they're definitely not slowing down their scoring anytime soon, as that moves them to 36 goals this season. But they maintain their 3 points lead at the top of the table due to results elsewhere going their way. But I mean, it's a huge result for Wrexham, as you said. It could be one of the biggest they've had in a very, very long time. Just, taking down what would seem like an unbeatable Coventry side. I think me and Ollie said, you didn't see where the loss would come from for Coventry. As much as you knew it was coming, you don't know where it would happen. And it's happened basically 2 days after we said it with this loss at the racecourse. But overall, I think, it's just not the Coventry we used to, especially on the defensive front. As I said, they're one of the better sides in the league for conceding goals. Still only at 12, but obviously they were at 9 before this game kicked off. So a disappointing defensive display for Coventry after what's been a very, very good few weeks.
Yeah, and I'd question some of the games they've conceded goals in as well. The likes of Oxford scoring past them in times. So I think in terms of being unbeatable, the signs were there the whole time before that they weren't unbeatable, and this was going to come for them. But I'd back them to keep a clean sheet against Sheffield United at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's Sheffield United is a difficult one, and we'll get onto them in a bit. But just from Coventry side, they have to respond. I think the big thing with these teams that go on these long unbeaten runs is how will they respond when that first loss hits. We're now going to see it for Coventry, the last team to have to deal with this adversity of losing a game in the Championship. So it'll be intriguing to see how they respond. As I said, you can't let one loss bring you down, because in this league, one bad run of form and all of a sudden you find yourself miles away from the playoffs and it all goes horribly wrong. So I doubt they'll do that. They're far too good to be going on bad runs like that. But it'll be interesting to see how they can respond against, as you said, a very, very poor Sheffield United side at the minute on Tuesday night. But we'll move on to our next game, which we're sort of going to combine 2 games into one here. And we're going to combine the Leicester and Southampton games into one. And we're going to discuss more about the managers, because obviously the big news that came out of this weekend was that Will Still has been sacked by Southampton, with them sat 21st in the league. This was after Preston handed them a 2-0 defeat at St Mary's. Also, Leicester coming off a 2-0 defeat on the early kickoff to Blackburn, which obviously we saw will still be in sack, Chris. Does it look like after another bad result for Leicester, which puts them down in 14th in the table, that Martí Cifuentes might be the next in the firing line?
I'd say Cifuentes would be the next manager to go because they've got the same ambitions as Southampton. They're both what we'd call yo-yo clubs. And a question as well, looking at the way they perform this season, of whether the term yo-yo club is a thing anymore. We're seeing more and more nowadays teams come down to the Championship and sort of lament there. Since the early 2010s, we've seen the likes of Stoke fall down there and just rot. QPR, for instance, as well. Norwich, how poor they've been. So the term yo-yo club doesn't seem to exist anymore. And I think with Will Still, I wouldn't rate him as highly as a manager as others would. I'd say the qualities are there as a manager, but the issues he's faced was that Southampton's not really a club that's stable. And I think if you'd given him a bit more of a stable job in England where he could have had more time, then the outcome would be different for him. But I don't think he was going to get much time at Southampton, especially with the way they were just sliding down the table. So if Leicester continue on this run, which, conceding 2 at home to Blackburn is a really poor result, especially for the likes of Leicester. So I would say Cifuentes would be the next manager to go.
I wouldn't say yo-yo clubs specifically is not a thing anymore. Obviously, this year we've seen the team struggle, but in the last few years, it's been quite common that the teams that have come down, at least the majority of them, are the ones promoted. Even last year, Leeds obviously had their 1 year, but then came straight back up. So the parachute payments and stuff, it's very rare that a non-parachute payment team does get promoted. We saw with Ipswich, obviously, being one of them examples, but just not entirely convinced. I think this year it might be the first time we see at least one of these teams not go back up from the teams that came down last year. I think Southampton's one you've got to look at. Just unless they get a massive turnaround with a new manager, they're going to be struggling. But again, they're only 10 points away from the playoffs, so they've probably given this new manager, whoever it may be, enough time to turn things around. As far as Cifuentes, I'm not sure if he'd be the next one to go. I think there's managers further down the hot seat. Even at Swansea, I think Alan Sheehan is one of the ones who's probably more on the hot seat at the minute than Cifuentes. I'd argue Liam Manning, as much as I said his job is safe, I think if the results continue, he won't be safe for much longer. But I think there's just a little bit of pressure creeping into Cifuentes. Obviously, as you said, same ambitions, but they have got 5 more points than Southampton so far this season. So they're still in a very recoverable position. They had an okay run of form, but at the minute they're on a bit of a slump. Only 1 win in the last 8 games, I believe, or 9 games now. And that 1 win, of course, coming against my Swansea City. But they've just been draws, I think, are the biggest issue with Leicester for me. Just draw all the time. They have to switch it around and sort it out quickly because, these draws that you're going to look back on in a few months' time and be like, oh, if only we won one of these games, then the season might have been different. So I don't necessarily think Cifuentes is next, but I think he's in the line of managers who has definitely got a lot of pressure on him in the coming weeks, especially with big games against Middlesbrough and Norwich for opposite reasons. Obviously, Middlesbrough at the top end of the table, Norwich down the bottom. So you have to imagine he'd have to get a few points out of them. Otherwise, I could agree with you. The pressure could really be on Martí Cifuentes at Leicester.
We say draws are the issue, but that's 3 consecutive losses for Leicester now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As it's just not a good run of form. I did question the Cifuentes appointment at the start of the year. I think I put it in line with Ruben Sellers at Hull, Sheffield United. Sorry. I put them both in sort of the same bracket of doesn't really scream an appointment for a team that's looking to go straight back into the Premier League after some short time away. And I as you saw, Sellers didn't work out at all, and Cifuentes isn't really going the way that Leicester had planned. So I think it's going to be a tough few weeks for Cifuentes to survive if the results don't come. Middlesbrough, you can maybe forgive not winning that one, but Norwich is a must-win game with the form that they're in. So it'll be intriguing to see if Cifuentes is the next to go or not. But we will move on to, unfortunately, as much as I don't want to speak about Swansea, I'm going to have to. 1-1 draw at the Valley. I was there. It was thanks to a really, really nice goal from Adam Eder, which cancelled out a defensive mishap in the first half, which led to Charlie Kelman's first goal of the Championship campaign. But I've said it so many times. I'm sure if you've watched any of the episodes, Chris, where you've been away, I've not been very happy with Swansea in the last few weeks. And it continues here because as much in the second half as we showed a bit of promise, probably should have gone on to win the game, it's still another draw. And again, we've been bailed out of a terrible performance for the most part by an absolute beautiful goal. It was Vopotnik against Norwich last week. And now it was Adam Eder from the edge of the box with a lovely finish into the bottom corner. But as I said before, I think Alan Sheehan should definitely be included in the managers that should be on the hot seat for losing their job.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the table, I know I put Swansea as a potential playoff team, a bit of a dark horse at the start of the season after your transfer activity. But I think for most people, you'd be about where most people would expect them to be as well. I don't think there's too much shame in a draw at Valley with the way Charlton are playing either, though. I think in some cases you could be happy with coming away with a point from a team like Charlton away this season.
I would agree, but they were awful against us on Saturday, like really bad. We had so many chances to put this game away. Josh Keane misses an absolute sitter in the last couple of minutes. We have, I talk about the refs all the time, but first minute, Yomji Sung gets brought down. Well, last man in the first minute of the game. Referee doesn't even give a foul. It's a blatant red card, in my opinion. But obviously, the referees are too scared to make big decisions nowadays because they already get so much criticism that they're too scared to even make one or two decisions because it's early in the game. And they know they're going to change the whole course of it. But I just don't think we should be. I think it shows the levels of ambitions of clubs like Southampton and Swansea. Obviously, we got passed off the park by Will Still a couple of weeks ago at St Mary's. Absolutely battered, albeit they didn't beat us, but that was more through their diabolical finishing in front of goal rather than us being good. And then, they've sacked that manager now who absolutely battered us. So I think, if you're looking at it from our perspective, you have to start asking questions about Sheehan. As well, we're the worst side in the league on expected goals, the worst side in big chances, and these are like by quite a lot. It's just bad attacking play. There's no creativity in this side at all. And week after week, mostly bailed out by Zamba Potnik with some absolutely brilliant goals this season. But low XG chances are what are getting us points. And as everyone knows, that isn't sustainable at all in this division because it will slow down eventually. You will stop scoring unbelievable goals. It won't carry on for the rest of the time. So as much as you said, it might not be that upsetting based on where Charlton are in the league. I think looking at our performance, it's a game we should have been comfortably winning, and we've come out of it with a point, and we were arguably lucky to get even that based on times of how poor we were going forward. So I think it just has to be the writing on the wall for Alan Sheehan. I really wished we'd just pull the trigger and make the ballsy decision because in this league you have to be brutal, and we spent £15 million at the transfer window this summer, and that is not a statement of intent from an owner that wants the team to be sat in 16th. And I think if we don't sack him, we let him carry on. It's just us showing as an ownership group that they're just willing to accept mediocrity.
Yeah, I do think as well, would you factor in the fact that you've played midweek and Charlton haven't? You've had a really tough game in midweek where you've put in a really solid performance, albeit you've lost against Man City. So would you say that factors in to this fixture?
It definitely has a part. Obviously, you're going to have certain players that are tired, have played 90 minutes on Wednesday, whereas Charlton had the week off. But at the same time, a lot of these players who started didn't play maybe at all or not that many minutes against Man City. Came off maybe after 60. So, as much as it's minutes, it's still not enough to probably warrant them not even being in the squad. Obviously, we lost Sam Vopotnik, which is not ideal, to a quad injury in training the day before we went to Charlton. Hopefully that's not too long term, but I think our two best players, it was criminal. They were both sat on the bench for this game against Charlton, and that's down to Alan Sheehan. Melka Vidal, absolutely brilliant against Man City. When you got players, and Zidane Nusa as well, who I think are our best two players from Man City, and neither of them make the starting 11. The second they both come on, and we look like a completely different team, and we actually had a chance to go win the game. So it does definitely factor into it, but at the same time, I think it's too long of a stretch now of bad results. I believe we've won 2 games in the league since we took the trip to Hillsborough in the end of August. We're now in November. So I think any other manager, that's enough to get rid of them. And I think we're just sort of happy clapping our way through a few okay results because we've beaten, as I said, our only wins in the league have come against the 4 worst teams in the division on paper. I think Southampton changed it a bit now, but at the time when we got into the game at Charlton, we had only beaten the bottom 4. So it's concerning to say the least. But as I said, I think Sheehan is definitely in trouble. I don't know how long we're going to give him. I hope it's not too long. I think we need to pull the trigger because, as I said, spending this much money is not a team that's just going to accept being average in the Championship. You are evidently having the ambitions to go and press on and try and be a team that competes for the playoffs. And the longer we keep Sheehan in charge, I think the longer we're going to keep falling away and away and away. And, we've got some tough games coming up. We had Charlton, which is always going to be a tough game away. We now travel to Preston on Wednesday night, then Ipswich at home on Saturday, and then Bristol City away the following weekend. So it's not an easy run of games. And I think 1 or 2 losses here, if he is still in the job by the time these games roll around, I think it should be the end of Alan Sheehan's reign at Swansea. But I'll end my rant before it goes on for the entire video because I could really speak about us all week. But we'll move on to maybe a shock, but not really, obviously, with how they've been. We spoke about them earlier in the video. But Sheffield United against Derby County, a 3-1 win for the Rams, thanks to another hat-trick, this time from Carlton Morris, to lead them to victory. Another disappointing result for Sheffield United. Callum O'Hare's goal, obviously only a consolation late on in the game, but it drops the Blades into 22nd, or keeps them in 22nd rather. Now 3 points cut adrift from safety, and a team that we all thought would be so good at the start of the year, at least a lot better than this. Even with their what seemed to be their Lord and Saviour Chris Wilder back, it's still not working at Sheffield United, Chris.
Yeah, I questioned the Wilder appointment. I questioned the Wilder appointment on both ends when it first happened, because it's one of those situations. It's almost like that friend who goes back to their toxic ex all the time. It seems to be Wilder and Sheffield United. And like I said, the one thing I did say was the fact that he'd been handed a 2-year contract, and this was a team who had sights set on returning to the Premier League. When they first appointed him, they probably still stood an outside chance of doing that, of climbing back up the table. I'd say any chance of that now is out the window completely. But if you were going to bring a manager back who has shown you he can't cut it in the Premier League, because he was in charge of a relegated Sheffield United team beforehand, why hand him a 2-year contract if you wanted that team to be back in the Premier League within a year, sort of thing? So I don't think the ambitions are sort of mapped out clearly at Sheffield United, and I think you could these results, you could argue that it's perhaps unsettled some of the players as well, who would question sacking a manager to hire a manager to then sack that manager to bring the manager you sacked back. So I think it's just unsettled that Sheffield United side entirely, and I'd be surprised if it hadn't.
It's weird, isn't it? As you said, it's sort of like, you sacked him for a reason, so why is he the first one you look to when you try and save a season when you thought he wasn't the man to do it at the start of the year? Why is he now the man after 7 games? But he looked like he was going to turn it around. Obviously, 2 back-to-back wins at Watford and Blackburn, but then, a huge collapse at Preston, and then just absolutely battered by Derby at home as well. You think question marks start to ring out again. I can't imagine they'll be I think they'll be patient with him because, as I said, this seems to be the man that always drags them out of trouble and pulls them into, better positions. But, they've lost them 2 games now. They now go away to Coventry, which is a nightmare situation after 2 losses on the bounce to go to the best team in the division by quite some distance, albeit that, and they're going to be angry after losing to Wrexham. They're going to want to put that right. So you have to imagine that's going to be a long afternoon for Blades fans in the Midlands. And then, QPR, Sheffield Wednesday, Portsmouth. You have to think that's 3 winnable games there for the Blades. But they've got to be careful because, they're already 3 points cut adrift. Southampton now get a new manager. That then puts the pressure on again for them because obviously Southampton will likely start picking up more results under new management, providing obviously they make the right appointment. They then could get cut off further adrift because you said you can't really see them beating Coventry midweek. And I just think it's trouble for Sheffield United personally. I just don't I don't agree with the Chris Wilder appointment. I think, as I said, why would you go back if you didn't think he was the right man at the start of the year? Why all of a sudden is he the right man again? It's also a bit of a stain on Sheffield United that they seem to not be able to function unless Chris Wilder's at the helm, which is not a good sign at all. It just seems to be any success they've had in recent years has been with Chris Wilder. So they just think, oh, we'll just keep bringing him back because it seems to work now and again. But as proven by the last 3 games, it doesn't really seem to be working this year.
I think as well, I know we've spoken a lot about Sheffield United here, so I will change it slightly just to give Derby their due as well. But one thing this league loves to do is prove us wrong, it seems, because at the start of the season we questioned the Carlton Morris signing, and he's banging goals away for fun. But the attacking flow of this game is so odd when you look at the attack momentum, because majority of attack momentum is in Sheffield United's favour for most of the game. And then what's even stranger about it is that Morris's second goal has come from Derby's lowest attacking momentum of the game, which I think just goes to show how odd this league has been this season.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, credit to Derby. It's a big win away at Bramall Lane. It's still not an easy place to go, despite their results they've had this season. But I just think Carlton Morris. He's been good. I said scoring goals for fun. I think it's a bit. He's up to 8 now. Obviously, 3 goals in 1 game is always going to help boost that tally up. So hopefully for his sake, he can continue this form because he's been a bit quiet in recent weeks. But obviously, he gets that goal, the hat trick there, which adds on, to a QPR goal last week. So after a quiet sort of spell, that's 4 goals in 2 games. Morris seems to be back on the right track, at least for the Rams. But I think overall, just for Sheffield United's sake, it's just another poor result. You look at a team that's struggling in the division. I believe Derby are about 17th in the table, even with that result at Sheffield United. So it's not a convincing side at all this year, and they've been completely outdone by them. So question marks have to ring out as I think we've asked it every week in the last few weeks, but what on earth is the problem at Sheffield United to keep being this bad? Because it evidently isn't the managers, because they keep changing and the issue still persists. But the players on paper look brilliant as well. So it really does bear the question, what exactly is going wrong at Sheffield United and why are they so poor? Next up, we will go to Stoke City versus Bristol City. And this one was an absolute corker of a game at the Bet365 Stadium. Stoke come away with a 5-1 win over what is a playoff rival still, even after that result. Bristol City, 5 goals. I mean, I think it was Divan Mabama stole the show for the Potters in this one. A hat trick plus, I believe, an assist for him as well to cap off an unbelievable performance. Millian Manhoff got a goal and assist. Junior Shamadou with a goal and assist as well. So again, Bristol City, after singing their praises for so many weeks this season, they have been absolutely torn apart at the seams by Stoke, which puts Stoke just 1 point outside the automatic positions.
Yeah, and I said some of those goals are really, really poor from Vitek to be conceding. The second one is the most questionable goal I've seen this season. I can't even begin to comprehend what's gone on there for that to happen. But I've seen some Bristol fans slating Vitek before this game, and it's even with QPR having been battered 7-1 earlier in the season, I probably put that down as one of the worst goalkeeping displays I've seen this season.
Yeah, it was poor. I mean, that second goal, as you said, is diabolical. I can't even begin to explain what has happened there. If you don't know, please just go and watch the video. I can't explain it. I don't know what he's done. He's just completely botched it. But, conceding 5 goals in any day is always bad. But in the fashion of how he's done at least 1 or 2 of them is just not acceptable from a goalkeeper who's shown really promising signs of being quite good this year, but very much an off day for him away at Stoke. But I mean, Stoke just continue to impress. And I said at the start of the year, if anyone was going to unlock Stoke and make them a team that competes, it was going to be Mark Robins. And I have been proven right in dividends so far as they sit 3rd in the table. I think Aaron Cresswell's been a very underrated signing in the league in general. I think he's been excellent for Stoke, even at the age of 35. He's showing his class. He could probably still play in the Premier League. I really do believe it. Watching him week on, week out. The defence as a whole is brilliant. You've got one of the best keepers in the league in Victor Johansson. You've got, Ashley Phillips and Ben Wilmot. Wilmot, an established centre-half in this league for a very long time, and Phillips being a very exciting young prospect. Shamadou, the goal and assist in this one, really sort of coming into himself after a tough first season with Stoke. He's been a lot better this year. And just overall, I think Sorba Thomas, this was the first time he's actually been kept quiet. Shockingly, in the 5-1 win is the first week he's been kept properly quiet, but just shows that they've got quality everywhere. They don't need to just rely on Thomas's goal contributions, so they can go to Manhoff or Mabama, for example, to come out with an absolute clinic of a game. But as far as Bristol City goes, as much as they still stay fifth in the league after that result, there's got to be some red flags flying from an absolute battering away from home.
Yeah, I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth with half of what you said there. Johansson being one of the best in the league, for instance, and the signing of Aaron Cresswell is... Even at his age, you'd expect a man with a European trophy to his name to add wealth to a Championship side, but he's just brought it to another level with what he's done to Stoke. So, yeah, I'd argue that is probably one of the smartest moves anyone in the transfer window made. Picking Aaron Cresswell up as a free agent is probably the best move we saw in the summer.
Yeah, he was a big transfer and said, has a wealth of experience. And as much, people thought he might not play that much, obviously, with some injury issues. And obviously, just at 35 years old as a left back, it's a very demanding position to play. So you don't expect much out of them, but he's been really consistent for them this season. And so overall, as I said so many years, I think it was every year, the Stoke team was always talented, but there was never the man to unlock the talent. And as I said, I thought Mark Robbins might be the one to finally get Stoke firing, and they absolutely are firing on all cylinders at the minute. And they look like a very, very hard team to beat, especially with their run of form at the minute now. That's 3 wins out of their last 4. That's keep them third in the table now, only just 1 point behind Middlesbrough, and only 4 points off the top now of Coventry after their defeat to Wrexham. So they're a very exciting team, Stoke. I think if you're a Stoke fan, for the first time in a very long time, you actually might have some optimism for the season ahead, because normally at this point you've been fairly average, and it all looks like the same old story for Stoke since their relegation in about 2018. So hopefully for Stoke fans, that this seems the beginning of their resurgence to actually be a team that we see compete at the top level in the league. We'll move on to Watford versus Middlesbrough. This has to go down as a shock result, but I wasn't too surprised by it. But nonetheless, it was a 3-0 win for the Hornets at home against Middlesbrough, thanks to, it was a loser goal in the first half, and then 2 Kieran Gard goals, but one of them a bit pretentious, because I believe it was Doumbia who had an unbelievable strike from the edge of the box, but it clipped Kieran Gard on the way in, and it actually went down as his goal. But it was a very nice strike from Doumbia to seal off what was a great win for Watford. But Borough, more possession, more shots, higher XG, and they lose 3-0. Again, as much for a team in second, it's got to be a performance that raises very big concerns.
Yeah, and we were saying about Leicester and how about Coventry and how they respond to a loss earlier. Middlesbrough looked like they'd responded well to their first loss with picking up 2 wins immediately after, but it now feels like that it's maybe just took some time to sink in that they'd lost. Because it's dropped points again for this Middlesbrough side. I think they'll be a bit hopeful. They cannot slip up at the weekend with Stoke playing Coventry at the weekend. It means Middlesbrough even more can't slip up if either of those sides drop points.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say as well, I didn't mention it in that intro there, but that second goal from Kieran Gard is one of the better goals I've seen this season. It's a fantastic cross from Jeremy Ngakia, who's in the form of his life at the minute for Watford. He pulls in a brilliant cross, and Kieran Gard finishes brilliantly across his body to put it into the bottom corner. Just a really nice goal. And as I said, it didn't matter with the XG and stuff, because they were just putting away their chances when they came. But I was impressed by Watford last week, as much as they lost 3-1 to Coventry. They showed some really nice signs on the attacking side of the ball. I think defensively they were a bit of a liability, but there were so many chances in that game to go ahead and beat Coventry. I think even saw a few Coventry fans say they were lucky to get away with 3 points there, because Watford had a lot of chances to go and bring this one back a bit closer. But they tidied up on the defensive side and maintained that sort of attacking danger this week. And, they've come out with a big 3 points against a team who are sat in the automatic promotion spots. But I think Jeremy Ngakia was my highlight of this game. I thought he was brilliant down that right-hand side. I said that cross, I can't actually put into words how good I think that perfectly placed that cross is. But it's just an overall brilliant performance from Watford, and I think they're such a polarising team. I think I say it every week, but you just don't know what you're ever going to get from Watford. One week they come out with this unbelievable attacking display and they beat one of the best teams in the league 3-0. And then you wouldn't be surprised if they go in a couple of weeks and they play a bad team and they lose. So they're such an awkward team to predict. As you probably look through our predictions this season, we're probably barely ever right on Watford because you never know what Watford you're going to get. But this week and even last week, I think you had a really good Watford side. And, Javi Gracia is a manager who we know can succeed and has seen success at teams before, especially at Watford. He's been good. He's a good manager. And I think he might be the man to finally stop this pile of Watford consistency, providing he actually gets given the time to do so, because we know what the Pozzos are like as owners of Watford, Chris. They're not very patient even after a few poor results. They do tend to pull the trigger very quickly.
Yeah, it's a surprise with Watford as well, with the type of almost the stature the club has. It's not like it's a massive club. I do not mean that in any disrespect to Watford whatsoever, but in this country, Watford wouldn't be your first go-to for majority of people. So with the owners showing as little patience as they do, it's surprising.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, their ambitions are very high, albeit of sort of any owner, you're going to want your team to be promoted to the Premier League, because obviously it's a massive beneficial for you. But at the same time, you've got to sort of be careful with managers like this. You've got to know where you are and how you stand as a club, because, as you said, it's not the categorically massive football club in English football. They're very much not established Premier League side, as much as they've had some great years in the Premier League. They weren't there for all too long, especially normally broken up into spells of being promoted and relegated in a typical yo-yo fashion. But I think Javi Gracia could be the man to turn it around. I just think they need to give him, as I said, the patience that he deserves, because it did baffle me from his perspective as to why you would go back to a side is not going to be patient with you. I think, he's better than that. I think he can do better than a team that's going to pull the trigger after 3-4 losses for no reason. I think Pezzolano, as much as the football wasn't great, again, it was very quick, but maybe a bit more understandable this time. But with their track record, it does baffle me as a manager why you would ever go back to a club that has done it to you before. You have been the one that's been sacked. So I think, yeah, he definitely has his chance. But as far as Middlesbrough goes, I think someone summed it up perfectly. It was like, under Carrick, it was such a exciting team to watch going forward and creative. And now, as much as they're getting the results, they're not really that team anymore.
Yeah, and just going back to the Watford point one last time, I'd argue what I say they're not that big of a club. I think the lack of patience they show plays a part in that. I think if you give a manager the time, he can unlock something big in that club. I think these performances have shown that. It's just, the inconsistency, the patience plays a part in that, I think. When you look at the difference between the defensive ratings against Coventry compared to against Middlesbrough, it shows the inconsistency that club has. I think they've got a fantastic centre-back in Matty Pollock. I remember him on loan at Cheltenham. He was a fantastic player at Cheltenham and, is a Championship regular for Watford.
Yeah, as you said, it's certainly a side with a lot of exciting talent. I think, again, it's like Stoke. We sort of say it every year, there's a load of talent in these squads, but they never quite reach the heavy heights that we expect for them. But again, Stoke doing very well. Watford finally seems to be turning a cog in their results, and they're up to 10th now in the league. So if they can keep that form going, who knows what the ceiling is for this Watford. So I do believe it is very high, because there is plenty of talent in this team, arguably more than a lot of teams in this division on paper. This team is brilliant. And there is huge potential for this team to explode and get some massive results in the coming weeks. But we will run through the last few games. Obviously, they're the games that we'll talk about in loads of detail, but we will have a little run through of all the other results from this weekend's action. We'll start Norwich versus Hull. The misery for Manning continues as Hull pile on for a 2-0 victory at Carrow Road. I believe, as we spoke about on Thursday, Hull's first win at Carrow Road in 15 years. Joe Gelhardt and Darko Yabi were the two goal scorers, as Hull sealed an important 3 points to keep them in touching distance of the playoffs, and Norwich now sit 23rd on 8 points, only worsened, of course, by Sheffield Wednesday, who do sit with a points deduction on -5. as much as we said, Chris, as we've seen the Norwich owners have said that Liam Manning's job is safe, if these results continue, you have to imagine it can't be safe for much longer.
I'm just baffled that he's even safe now. Norwich, a team who, we didn't back them for. I don't think any of us backed them for a playoff run or anything this season. But a side who's been in the Premier League recently, a side who under Daniel Farke, granted it's a completely different side now, but a club who under Daniel Farke used to tear this division apart for fun, and now they're sitting in the bottom three. I don't understand how you could be happy with seeing Norwich in the bottom three of a Championship at all.
No, I mean, you said no one predicted them to be the playoffs. I did. I thought this would be my dark horse team because there's so much talent in this Norwich team, and I thought you bring in a manager who just took a fairly okay Bristol City side to a playoffs. You think it's got all the fundamentals of it being an absolute brilliant season, and it's just fallen to pieces. The players aren't performing at the levels that they should be. The manager's not getting the best out of them. And it's just all going wrong. And I think when it's this bad, I think you have to pull the trigger and make a decision because you're going to, again, the season is more or less over if you don't pull the trigger and do something now, because as much as we're still early, well, with how far away they are from the playoffs, for example, I'm not saying they'll be a playoff side this year, but their chances of being a playoff side this year are withering away every week with these bad results. They lose at home again, and I believe they're one of the worst teams in the division on home form anyway. It's not good enough for a Norwich side. I mean, yeah, the worst team in the league on home form. No points at home. They've lost every single game at Carrow Road this season. I mean, that is unforgivable for any club. I really do believe that is really, really bad. And there has to change. I think there has to be a change. And I agree with you. I don't know why Liam Manning is so safe with how bad these performances have been, because the buck has to stop somewhere.
The thing is, as well, is they're the only club now in the league who've lost their last 5 in a row, with Sheffield Wednesday drawing at the weekend. So they're the only club with 5 losses in a row. And at the point where it's hit 5 in a row, is that not time to go?
You would think so, especially for a club with big ambitions. You'd think it would be time to sort of pull the trigger, but we'll see how that one develops in the next couple of weeks. As we just spoke about Sheffield Wednesday, a point on the road at the Hawthorns in a fairly boring 0-0 draw. A good defensive display, though, from Wednesday, especially Ethan Horvath in goal, had a really nice game to keep West Brom out. And West Brom's sort of, you have to say bad run of form now, obviously one win in their last 5 or 6 games. Pressure piling on Ryan Mason to sort of get the best out of this team, because, as I said, he's not in any danger of being sacked. But again, another team you expect to be in the playoff conversation, and as much as they are up at that end of the table, they are struggling, Chris.
Yeah. Phillips was probably the only talking point of that game, putting in a man of the match performance at the back. Other than that, there's really no talking points, which I think in a lot of ways it sums West Brom up. There's just never really anything to talk about with them, and that's part of the reason why they end up where they end up in the table, missing out on playoffs and falling short of promotion all the time.
Yeah, it's just not good enough. And as you said, they need to be that playoff team, and they just never seem to reach them heavy heights. But as far as Sheffield Wednesday goes, you've got to give them their flowers, because that's a really, really nice performance away from home, and they were unlucky to come away with only a point. But, they get points on the board. As I said, the season's pretty much done. We know they're going to be one of the teams headed down to League One this year, but obviously their new era now, with Chansiri gone, it's nice to see that they're getting some positive results to sort of build on. I think that's the best thing they can do now, is just try and get some results behind them to build on their campaign in League One next year, which should hopefully for them be their sort of rebirth of their club after a very, very rough few years with Chansiri at the helm. One of the games next that we was very unlucky to miss out on, our sort of featured ones, Birmingham 4, Portsmouth 0. Birmingham finally turn it around after a rough few weeks. They get a win at home to Portsmouth in big, big fashion, and they needed it, obviously, after losing their home and beaten streak to Hull. They come out with a big, big performance. I believe, albeit Jay Stanfield did miss a penalty in this one, I believe, but it didn't matter in the end. Iwata with a great performance, especially with a goal and an assist himself. But overall, I mean, Cochrane as well with 2 assists. Birmingham finally back to their best after a very rocky couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's not a result that's really shocked me. You'd always back Blues to beat Portsmouth. It's just the manner of how they've done it is what's surprised me. I think Portsmouth started as a really stable team, and we spent a few weeks talking about them, how they'd be safe if they carried on, but then it's all slipped from there for Portsmouth. And now with the relegation zone looking as shaky as it had, it's about as unstable as the clubs down there, really. With you'd back Southampton to get out of this with a new manager, you'd back Norwich to get out of this if they could change their manager. So I think Portsmouth could be in some real trouble soon.
Yeah, I think you got to look at, as you said, it's more so the teams that are below them are probably not going to be below them come May at the end of the season. They're probably going to pick up now and pull away. So you struggle to see teams that are going to fall below Portsmouth with how good the teams above them have been in the last couple of games. Some teams like Derby, for example, shown a lot of promise recently, and they've sort of pulled up away now. So Portsmouth need to get results on the board. I wasn't surprised maybe by the result of the game because Birmingham have been poor. I think it's important to estimate they have not been good for a while now. They've struggled, but they're sort of clicking a bit again. Chris Davis was definitely one of the managers on the hot seat. I think this sort of firmly puts that one to bed for now. With a big win at home, it's always going to please the fans. But overall, a fairly meh sort of week for Portsmouth fans where they have to sort of look at themselves and think we have to start getting results soon. Oxford United 2, Millwall 2. It was absolute heartbreak for Millwall away at the Kassam Stadium, thanks to a Przemysław Placheta 96th minute goal to cancel out what looked like a winner from Cooper in the 66th minute. Also, Cameron Brannigan with an absolute worldie in this game, because I'm convinced the man does not ever score a bad goal, because every time I see this guy score, it's always an absolute screamer, and he continued this one up in this game, and it was enough to get a pretty big point for Oxford, all things considered, especially as a Millwall team that's sat in fourth in the league right now. It has to be put down as a pretty good result, all things considered, for Oxford.
Yeah, they were the side we spoke about most of being in trouble. I think every one of us put them to go down, did we not? Or around about the relegation zone.
I think Elliot had them in 12th, funnily enough. But apart from that, I think we were all there or thereabouts for them being in trouble, yeah.
Is that where Gary Rowett got his top finish of a top half
Yes,
aim from Elliot?
it was.
But it was never really on Oxford finishing in the top half. I think Rowett's a fantastic manager, and if he had a few years at this club, he could absolutely turn it into something. But I think the main issue is for such a small club compared to the rest of the division. And again, it's not in a disrespectful way. It's just the way the game goes. That they're never going to be able to compete with the rest of the Championship really financially, I don't think.
No, and it's always the big trouble for teams like Oxford when they come up. It's staying in the division, which they did last year. They did consolidate and stay in the league, but as I said at the start of the year, and it was my main concern with Oxford, is how much better the teams that came up were compared to last year. You obviously have three teams who come up all with ambitions to be in the top half of the table, and none of them are going to go down, especially not Charlton and Birmingham, Wrexham as well. They're pulling away every week, getting better and better. So I can't see any of them teams being in trouble. So then again, with the teams below Oxford, Blackburn, Portsmouth, Southampton, Sheffield United, Norwich, and Sheffield Wednesday, you'd argue only Sheffield Wednesday, Portsmouth and Blackburn will be teams in that sort of relegation danger come May. So you have to be better than one of them with all of them three teams if you want to stay in this division. And would you say Oxford are better than Portsmouth? And, Blackburn is up for debate. So it'll be interesting. But I think Mill will be very disappointed here. They had a big chance, would have gone, I believe, into the automatic promotion spots had they held on to this win due to the results of Middlesbrough. But at the end of the day, it was not meant to be, and they get a point which keeps them in fourth in the table. Another game, as we said, plenty of games this week we could have spoken about, but QPR Ipswich, a 4-1 win for Ipswich away at Loftus Road, thanks to 2 goals from George Hurst and 2 goals from Marcelino Nunes. I think it is sod's law, because I believe it was either me and Lewis on Monday or me and Ollie on Thursday who spoke how poor George Hurst is for Ipswich, for him to come out and score twice in this game. It was pretty much written, but a much needed big win for Ipswich, Chris. That puts them now back into touching distance of the playoff places.
Yeah, and it highlights Norwich's woes as well, doesn't it? Nunez having an absolute blinder of a game for Ipswich. The only thing I'd say is the form's still a bit shaky for Ipswich. They're still out of not even in the playoff spots at the moment. If worse came to worst and this side didn't manage to win promotion back to the Premier League, because I think this is the one side on paper you would expect to go back up, would you say McKenna's time at Ipswich is done if they fail to go back up?
It'll be a question, definitely. I think if they get into the playoffs, for example, and lost the playoffs, I wouldn't say be sacked for that. But if they miss out on the playoffs entirely, I think that is when you sort of consider pulling the trigger. But he's a young manager with a lot of potential. He's had some very good years at Ipswich. So I think you got to be careful getting rid of managers like this, because as much as you may think is bad, the grass isn't always greener with a new manager. We've seen it so many times. People pull the trigger too early, and then it ends up being worse. So I think for now, he's absolutely fine. I think, as you said, if they miss the playoffs entirely, I think that's when you look to maybe make a change, because this is a team that probably should win this league. And to miss out on promotion entirely would be a disaster season for Ipswich, really, considering the money they've put into it and where their ambitions are set now. But overall, apart from a QPR perspective, I said it when they played us, they're not very good at the minute, and they're proving me right every week. Another big loss this time away, at home again, just one win in the last four, and it's against us, which I said doesn't even count with how bad we've been in recent weeks. So they've just been poor, and I'm not convinced. And they're going to Southampton on Wednesday, who are, just at the manager. That's going to be a very tough task to beat them as well. And then you play Sheffield United side, who are in sort of need to win games, and then Hull, who have been excellent. So I think it's run of misery going to continue for QPR with how poor they've been in recent weeks after what was a really nice spell after the 7-1 defeat to Coventry. They've just not really been the same team since that Bristol City win at Ashton Gate, and I think their struggles could continue if they're not careful, as they are continuously falling away from them playoff places in the Championship. But that is all we have for you this week. That is all the games from this week's action. So thank you very much to Chris for joining me, and we will see you all for our preview later in the week.